Is $1 million enough for retirement?
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Brian, I am excited about this show because I feel like we're going to have an opportunity to answer the age-old question that we get, and all the trolls are going to be so excited because if you ask us like the number one thing that we get like hit on and pegged with and jabs thrown at us, it's this idea around us trying to get people excited about becoming millionaires. And then they start, millions is not so good. No, we are going to answer the question definitively today. Is $1 million enough to retire?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I feel like I have to pull a few arrows out every so often because people say, you don't take into account inflation. But I'm always quick to remind people, look, as somebody, we've both been on this journey of wealth creation, not only for ourselves, but for our clients. And there's a simple math fact. You don't get to 3 million, you don't get to 5 million, you don't get to 10 million without the first million.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people, we've done so many shows where the average American can't come up with $1,000, and you hear about where median assets are for people as they approach retirement. So, but I don't, so people are horrible at building and saving. So even the bar of $1 million, a lot of people aren't doing it.
Yep.
So yes, we are aspirational and we respect $1 million, but I want all trolls to unite, get excited. This is the content that you're going to love because we actually tell you how inflation can eat the purchasing power of $1 million. And then here's what I like. We close it out, each age group that we're about to go through, with the optimist standpoint of what you need to actually be putting to work to maximize and make sure you do get the best version of retirement for yourself.
So here's the question that we're going to aim to answer. If I am X age, will $1 million be enough for me to retire? So Brian, I think it makes sense. We love doing these sort of by age, decades segments. Let's start right at the beginning in the 20s. The question that we have is for someone in their 20s, will $1 million be enough for them to retire?
Now, we could not talk about is $1 million enough without first talking about, I love it, some 88 times over.
Yep.
I try to get everyone excited is that what you have an abundance of in your 20s is time. And we all know the formula for wealth creation is you definitely need to have the discipline to live on less than you make, turn that discipline into money, and that margin, that excess, then can be invested. And over time, it can do tremendous things for you. And that's why I know I got excited about being a person that didn't come from resources. Bo's the same way, that as soon as I found out that $100 a month could turn me into a millionaire, I was on the train. I was excited. I was on board for doing this for the rest of my life. And look, I don't want anybody to lose that magic, but we are going to kind of give you the rest of the story today.
That's right. So for $95 a month, for a 20-year-old starting on the wealth building journey, they can build, if they do that from age 20 to 65, to $1 million. So then the question becomes, is $1 million enough? Well, we know that $1 million, if we assume a 3% inflation rate, $1 million today will be worth about $295,000 when that 20-year-old gets to age 65. Well, if we assume a 5% withdrawal rate, we know that about $295,000 can generate an annual income in perpetuity of about $15,000 in today's dollar. So the question is if you're in your 20s now, when you retire at 65, can you live off of about $15,000 a year?
Yeah, the equivalent of making $15,000 a year probably not going to be enough for most people. So I know you trolls, you like the bad news. So you're like, yeah, see, they finally told us the truth. $1 million is worth, a little under $300,000. So you're right. You're going to need more than $1 million. I don't like to lead or close something out with just negative information. So, Bo, let's kind of walk them through. First of all, why is the $15,000 not going to be enough? And then how do we get them out of this situation?
Yeah, the first thing is when we're in our 20s, the fact is there's a lot of life yet to happen. We don't know what our 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old self looks like. And the haunting reality, the haunting truth is as our commitments increase, as we have families and jobs and houses and obligations, so too often does our disposable income decrease at the same time. That's what actually gets us into the messy middle. So as we have more and more commitments, more and more things that are tugging on us, we are responsible for more and more stuff. I know for me personally, Brian, 15 grand in college, could have done that no problem. Could have lived off that without a doubt. Looking forward to married Bo with mortgage Bo with kids Bo, $15,000 just doesn't get the job done anymore.
I feel for our podcast listeners because they're not getting to see the visual here of this financial stages of life that we've created. I think that this goes even beyond the subject matter we're covering today, is because what this shows is it shows where you are with life commitments versus disposable income. You know, and it is one of those things when you graduate college, you're like, heck, I could make $10, $20 last a lot longer. But the problem is as you get through life and you get closer to your 30s with marriage, you buy a home, you start having a family, you'll see there's so many things pulling on your back pocket that it just is stress. But this is the part, and that's why I take the macro vision. FIRE is so hard. If you want to do financial independence and retire early, that's why I always tell people in your 20s, your 30s, you think you're going to leave the workforce even in your 40s, there's still so much in life that can throw curveballs at you. I think it's amazing when you look at this visual and you see there's a crossover point that happens in your 50s where once again, your disposable income exceeds your commitments. Guess what? Ding, ding, ding. This is why the typical retirement, I think, is much more viable 55, 60, 65, because you know who you are, where you're going, how much you need. It all works, and I love that the financial stages kind of brings that all into a visual.
And we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what other things might happen in the future. Maybe we get our budgeting down and we say, oh yeah, no, 15 grand can do that. But perhaps we lose a job and we can't save at the same pace, or we get sick, or we have aging parents, or we have family issues. There are other things that will likely happen between the time you're 20 and the time that you retire that might substantiate, you know what? $1 million just isn't enough. It's not going to get the job done.
Now, most shows would probably just say $1 million is not enough.
And then move on to the next thing.
But we are better than that. We're nerds. We actually created calculations to let you guys know, okay, well, if $1 million isn't going to be good for somebody in their 20s that wants to have a normal retirement, how much should they have to get that same purchasing power?
So this is what we said. Let's walk through a case study. So let's assume that your goal when you retire is to replace 100% of your pre-retirement income. And let's assume that in your working years, every year, your wages keep up with inflation of about 3%. So you get 3% wage growth every year. And let's assume that when you put your army of dollar bills to work, you can earn, on average, about 8% rate of return. You're going to retire at 65, and when you retire, you want to have a 5% withdrawal rate. That's a sustainable withdrawal rate at age 65. Well, for a 25-year-old in this country right now, we know that the median income is about $34,000. So that 25-year-old is going to have 3% pay raises all the way out until 65, and at 65, they want to replace 100% of that pre-retirement income. In order to do that, by the time that 25-year-old gets to 65, they will need to have accumulated about $2.3 million, which means in order to do that, right now today, they need to start saving about $653 a month at age 25 to get to almost $2.3 million.
So I guess if you're in Trollville and you're saying what's $1 million in reality, it's probably around $2.3 million.
That should be your goal. That should be the thing that you are working towards, that you're moving towards.
Because the $34,000 a year by retirement is actually the equivalent of close to $114,000 after you adjust it for inflation and wage growth and all the other things. That seems pretty reasonable. I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world.
Reasonable.
And then I even think that, $653, that's slightly above maxing out the Roth IRA each year.
Maybe that's getting your employer match and maxing out your Roth IRA. Maybe it's something in that ballpark.
Pretty powerful. So hopefully that's reframed where the goals are, taking into account inflation. That's very important right now, but also still keeping you optimistic about what you can create for the future.
Okay, so $1 million, we answered the question, probably not going to be enough for someone in their 20s. Well, what about someone in their 30s? If I'm a 30-year-old, is $1 million a large enough goal? Will I be able to retire if I just get to $1 million and I'm in my 30s presently?
Well, taking into account, once again, inflation. And now, look, you are getting closer to the goal, so maybe inflation hasn't eaten as much.
Sure.
But we're still decades away. It's gutting a pretty good chunk. But first, before we go to the negative side, let's get people excited about what their army of dollars can actually become.
Yeah, remember, early on, time is your most valuable resource. So if you're a 30-year-old just starting out and you have a goal of getting to $1 million, it's only going to require you, if you're starting at dead zero at 30, to save about $270 a month until you retire. Just that small amount of savings can get you to $1 million. When you get there, about 90% of your portfolio would be your army of dollar bills working for you.
The growth.
The growth, that's exactly right. So the question is $1 million enough for you in your 30s?
Unfortunately, once again, the answer for a 30-something is probably not.
Probably not. So again, if we assume a 3% inflation rate, $1 million today would probably be worth about $401,000 for a 35-year-old when they get to age 65. And again, if we assume a 5% withdrawal rate, that would generate an annual income for that person of about $20,000 a year. And so $20,000 is better than what it would generate for the 20-year-olds, but still may be hard to have an entire retirement lifestyle built off of $20,000.
Fortunately, there's a resource out there. You can go out there and see what is the typical living expense of Americans. And according to our research, it comes in a little over $2,800 a month. Well, doing some quick math, we can see $20,000 a month is actually just under $1,700 a month. That's why we say it's probably not enough.
Probably not.
Is because it's inflation's going to eat away at its purchasing power. Adjusting it for today's dollars, you're going to need to put a little more work in.
Now, here's what's interesting. Daniel said, guys, I feel like you're giving unfair shake because I think, right, a lot of folks could live off of $20,000 a year. This is what it means, though. There's no luxuries, no dining out, no giving gifts, no new gadgets, no new toys, and no unexpected surprises. Well, I guess if that's the kind of like retirement financial independence life you want to live, then maybe it could work, but odds are probably not.
Well, this is, and look, I'm not trying to pick on fire, but I do think it's one of those things for 30-somethings, even if you're living that minimalist lifestyle. We know, because it's an annual research report that comes out every year about what is healthcare going to cost for retirees. Sure. We know it right now. It's anticipated over your lifetime you're going to spend about $316,000 on healthcare, and we know that's probably going to be weighted heavily towards those latter years. So that uncertainty right there would blow up somebody kind of thinking this is enough money, for a 30-something.
But you've already said, Brian, our goal, what we like to do is we like to go beyond common sense. We like to take our stuff to the next level. So if $1 million for most 30-year-olds won't get the job done, the next question is, well, how much do you need? So again, let's look at a case study. Let's assume that your goal is to replace 100% of your pre-retirement income. You can earn an 8% rate of return on your investments. Your wages increase at about 3% per year. You want to retire at 65, and you feel like a 5% withdrawal rate would be sustainable over the remainder of your life. Well, right now in this country, according to don'tquityourdayjob.com, DQYDJ.com, about $50,000 is the median income for someone who is 35 years old. So if a 35-year-old wanted to replace 100% of their pre-retirement income by the time they get to 65, they will need to have saved about $2.5 million by the time that they retire. It's actually $2,456,000, or about $2.5 million.
And here's what I think is interesting. You've got it right up there on the screen. You'd have to start saving. This looks like a pretty big number. So fortunately, we have this broken down a little more digestible number. If you had already started saving by the time you were 25, $1,649 a month.
That sounds hard, right? Like as I'm saying, that's a big. I mean, a lot of folks. That's like might be more than like your mortgage payment. Might be more than like your mortgage and your auto payment. That's a big. That's a big nut.
That's
for most
starting
folks.
from zero for a 35-year-old. I know we have a lot of financial mutants that are watching this. They actually started sooner.
That's right.
So if you had started saving earlier, all you'd have to have, as long as you were at, because a 25-year-old who was just doing basic investing would probably already have about $128,754,
Okay.
so right under $129,000. And if you had that, as long as you were right under that $129,000, $130,000, you'd only need to save $704 a month for the
So-
rest of your working career.
I'm going to repeat what you just said. If I'm 35 and I've got about $130,000 saved up,
Yep.
and I can save about $700 a month, I'm on my way to having $2.5 million by the time I retire, and that's probably going to allow me to live a similar lifestyle in retirement that I was living immediately before retirement.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, okay, so for a 30-year-old, it doesn't sound like $1 million is the number. Maybe that's not what you shoot for. Maybe it's something closer to the $2.5 million range.
So we've covered 20-year-olds, we've covered 30-year-olds. Let's talk about the 40-year-olds. This
Okay.
is definitely, you're getting to that fork in the road moment. You ought to be thinking about these things. Is $1 million going to be enough for a 40-year-old? We have a lot to know about that. But once again, before I get into the negativity of
Sure.
that, let's talk about just how powerful, because I think a lot of people, and I have painted a picture where sometimes I think people watch our content and they say, I get it, 20-year-olds,
Sky's the limit.
the sky's the limit. You can be anything you want because you have so much time and opportunity. Even 30-year-olds, because remember, 20-somethings, especially a 20-year-old, 95% of your $1 million account is going to be the growth, not your contribution, but the growth of your army of dollar bills. For a 30-something, for a 30-year-old, it's going to be 89%
That's right.
of your account value is going to be the growth, only 11% is yours. But guys, that's not the end of it. You still have an opportunity, even at age 40, 77% of your net worth or your $1 million at retirement could be from your army of dollar bills working harder with than you can with your hands, your back, your brains. It's actually the compounding growth. You would only have to save about $780 a month for the rest of your working career to have $1 million.
And this assumes that you didn't really do a lot of the hard work early on in your 20s and 30s. This assumes starting at zero. And so the question becomes, okay, if I do this and I get to $1 million, I hit the 7-figure status, will that be enough for me if I'm in my 40s? Well, if we think about, we have 20 years to retirement, right? $1 million today for someone in their 40s is going to be worth about $543,000 when they get to retirement in today's dollar. So if you have a 5% withdrawal rate, sustainable over the long term, that could generate for you about $27,000 a year in today's dollars. So $27,000, it's certainly better than what the 20 said when it was like in the teens of thousands. So we're getting a little bit better, but will that get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, I do get excited because it's getting closer to seeming like a reasonable sum, especially if you're debt free and you're in retirement. But I'm still answering probably not.
Probably
because
not.
I don't want my retirement to feel like it's just this compromise where I'm minimizing every decision I have to make financially. That seems tough because you still have a lot of life to live before you get to retirement. I just don't know that that's the lifestyle I'm looking for.
And there's a lot of things that are going to change. Even if you say at 40 years old, you know what? Yeah, okay, if I budget really, really well, I can live off of that number. But man, you're talking about if you're planning on working all the way 25 years, circumstances can change, inflation can change, macroeconomic factors can change. There's a lot of stuff that can change that might suggest that may be a little more lean than you want to be going into retirement.
Let's go ahead and help our financial mutants. If we know $1 million would be cutting it close, how much should they be saving? What's the goal amount, and how do we get there?
All right, so if we want to replace 100% of our pre-retirement income, and we assume that our wages increase at about 3% a year, and we can grow our investments at about 8%, and when we retire, we have a 5% long-term sustainable withdrawal rate, how much we need to save? We know right now, for someone who's 45 years old, the median income is about $54,000 a year. So if they wanted to replace that level of lifestyle when they get to retirement, they would need to save by age 65 about 1.9, just shy of $2 million for retirement.
What I think is pretty powerful about this, that $54,000 when it's inflated up for all your pay raises and stuff, it puts you at about $100,000 at retirement.
pre-retirement
because
income,
that's
yeah.
where that's right. Where you're not a little over $98,000. I think $100,000. People would be like, yeah, I think I can make $100,000 would be great.
I could live off that.
So really, if you are somebody who's in your mid 40s, maybe your goal's not $1 million. Based upon our calculations, it's right there, right under $2 million is going to get the job done. So now let's talk about how do you get there. So we have it. Look. If you're trying to figure out if you're 45 years of age, if you want to spot check where you are currently today, you need to be right around $332,000 to make that happen. And even though you have $332,000, we'd want you still saving about $560 a month until you retire.
And remember, wealth building is like squeezing a balloon. Maybe you're 45 and say, guys, I'm not at 331 yet. Maybe I'm only at 250 or 200 or 100. Well, what that means is that saving $560 a month probably won't do it for you. You probably have to kick up that savings rate. But maybe you're on the other end. Maybe you're someone who says, guys, I'm way past that. I've got $500,000 saved. I've got $600,000. Maybe you can decrease that savings rate if your goal is only to replace about $54,000 in today's dollars. What you have to do in your 40s that I think is different from your 30s and your 20s is you have to do an assessment of where you are and which part of that balloon you need to squeeze. It's kind of, I've heard you say this before, but it's kind of like a fork in the road moment where you decide which way you're going to go.
Yeah, I definitely think this is the point where you've got to take inventory. Do you need to, if you've saved enough, congratulations, you get to start making some of the fun decisions like prepaying debt and other things. However, if you're behind, it's exactly what Bo said, hit the accelerator, save more money so that you can hit retirement with some momentum. That leads us to the 50-year-olds.
All right. So far, the answers have been, Brian, like in our 20s, $1 million might not be enough. And in our 30s, $1 million's probably not enough. In our 40s, realistically, $1 million's not enough. So surely by our 50s, the narrative is changing, right?
Well, I do like it. Look, there's a little ray of hope here on what inflation does as you get older. Because as you get to a certain age, especially in your 50s and even in your 60s, as you are getting within a decade to 15 years from retirement, inflation, yes, will have an impact, but it's not going to gut it like it does for a 20 or 30-year-old. Now, look, it makes it harder to earn investment income without risk, but I think if you're taking about the eating away of your purchasing power, there's just less time to work, so you don't have to get caught up in it as much. So maybe $1 million does go a little bit further for a 50-something than it does for that 20 and 30-year-old that are planning for retirement.
All right, so now potentially we have a goal. Okay, $1 million will do it. If I'm 50 years old and maybe I've not been doing things, I'm just starting right now. If I say, okay, I'm bought in, guys. I hear you. I believe it. What do I need to start doing today at 50 to get to $1 million by the time that I get to 65? Well, the answer is not easy, right? When you're young, it's easy. As you age, it gets a little bit harder. You'd still have to save about $2,500 a month starting at 50 to get to $1 million by the time you get to 65. But this is what's exciting. If you do that, you will have saved about $446,000 over that 15-year time period. However, your portfolio would be worth $1 million. That means that 55% of the total value, even if you don't start until 50, comes from your army of dollar bills doing what your army of dollar bills does, and that's growing upon itself, letting compound interest do the amazing work inside your portfolio that it can do.
It's also important to note that this is probably your peak earning years. I mean, in your late 40s, early 50s, you are earning the highest sums of money you will in your career. So if you are behind, this is probably the best time because once again, if we went over that life graph, your disposable income is reaching peak levels, your life commitments, because the kids are getting older, they're getting out of the house. This probably is the time that hopefully you can renew your vow and your purpose of saving, that you can save 30, 40, even 50%. So it's not all lost, especially when you think about the fact that still 55% is going to come from your army of dollar bills. I say get excited and get motivated. Find the solution. Don't start woe-ising me yet.
So we know that, again, inflation is still present. So $1 million today will not be exactly worth $1 million tomorrow. So if you're someone in your 50s, we think that $1 million today, when you get to retirement around age 65, will be worth about $737,000. And if we assume a 5% sustainable long-term withdrawal rate, that can generate for you an annual income of just under about $37,000 a year. Well, $37,000 a year is that sounds like a meaningful income. That's actually some substantial income replacement relative to the median income of the average American presently today.
So I think the answer now, the needle gets moved from no to probably no to now maybe. Because there's also another variable that's sitting out there. I always get nervous about telling 20 and 30 and even 40-year-olds to count on Social Security because we just don't know. That system has struggles. But I think once you're in your 50s, there is a chance if you take into what your portfolio can generate, that mid-30s level, plus what you'll make in Social Security, we're getting into mid-$50,000 range. Maybe that's viable for certain people.
Yeah, Daniel was great. He pulled this. I think he found that the average Social Security income for folks in the country is a little over somewhere between $18,000 to $19,000 a year. Yeah, I think that's if you're talking about getting your post-retirement financial independence income close to like $5-ish grand a month, that's not a bad living. That's certainly not a bad retirement living. But maybe you say, okay, well, $1 million sounds, okay, there's a maybe. What would it take to take that maybe and move it into like we can do this. This is financial independence. How much do you need? So again, if we want to replace 100% of our pre-retirement income, we can earn 8% on our investments. Our wages increase at about 3% per year. And at 65, we think a 5% withdrawal rate will be sustainable over the long term. We know that a 55-year-old right now, median income in this country is about $52,000. So for that person, the median American in this country, to be able to replace that income when they get to retirement, they would need about $1.4 million. So it's more than $1 million. It's not, $1 million didn't quite hit it. They would need to be at about $1.4 million to replace 100% of that pre-retirement income.
And I want to add a little more depth to this because this is people getting close to thinking about this. That $1.4 million is the equivalent of about $70,000 a year.
That's great.
And then if you stack in on top of that Social Security, I mean, we are getting into some decent, if you just could do this. So let's talk about what you'd have to have invested. You would have to have about $599,000 invested, and that's going to get you a lot closer. And here's what's cool. Yes, you would still need to keep investing in saving for the future, but it's only around $402 a month.
See, I think that's what's so exciting. Remember, we said if you started from a dead stop, from dead zero, just to get to $1 million, you had to be saving like $2,500 a month.
$1,000. I mean, it's multiple thousands of dollars a month.
And yet, if you were able to do some of the work and you're able to build some of the wealth and you're able to get there, all that's required from a saving standpoint, if you've already accumulated that $600,000, is $400 a month, which is sustainable and attainable, especially if you're someone who has a median income of $52,000 a year.
Yeah, that's great. So I think all of our 50-year-olds, once again, take inventory. You can see the horizon on the future of what financial independence looks like. You can now figure out, hey, what do I need to do? Do I need to take my foot off the accelerator? Do I need to think about risk management, or do I need to save even more? Take inventory so you can prepare for that next stage, that next decade, so that you hit retirement right.
All right, so we've answered the question for 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Now let's talk about 60s. These are the folks who probably are the most likely to be considering retirement, most likely to be considering stepping away from the workforce. So the question that we have is, all right, $1 million, I hear you guys talk about it. It's sort of the creme de la creme of wealth, right? Like it's the thing that people talk about, being a millionaire. If I get there and I'm in my 60s, does that mean that I can actually retire? Is that a real and realistic number for me?
Now, here's the good news. When you're in your 60s, when we talk about inflation adjustments, we've been making some pretty big assumptions, and the fact that we've been having to tell you what $1 million could be worth when you're in your 20s or 30s and purchasing power was. The good news is when you're 65, $1 million can purchase $1 million worth. I mean, not to be Captain Obvious here, but it is just $1 million is what it is. So you can try to very quickly figure out what does this buy me, and by our accounts, it can get you a reasonable withdrawal rate
That's
that
right.
can actually sustain you. But let's talk about actually what it means from growth, because it doesn't mean growth is done just yet.
It doesn't mean it's done yet. However, the onus is now fallen on you to build up your wealth. By the time that you get to age 60, if you're thinking about how much will your army of dollar bills grow from age 60 to age 65, it's no longer this 95% number or this 89% number. There's still growth inherent, but it's only about 22% of your portfolio will be the growth from age 60 to age 65. So at this stage, if you're realistic about being a millionaire, you likely have had to have done some work before you got here to hit that $1 million status.
Yeah, because if you're playing catch up, saving $13,000 a month
it's
when you're
hard.
age 60 for the next 5 years, whew,
That's
that
pretty,
sounds
that's
like
pretty
a
intense.
pretty steep,
pretty intense.
pretty steep mountain to climb. But but it is that's where the numbers fall. I still like that 22% can still come from your army of dollar bills. That's pretty powerful.
So here's the question then. All right, you guys said, in the 20s, no, 30s, no, 40s, no, 50s, maybe, 60s. Let's talk about what can $1 million do for you. Well, we know if we have $1 million portfolio and we have a 5% withdrawal rate, that can generate about $50,000. Pretty simple math there of annual income for you. Well, when you take that $50,000 and you add on top of it the average Social Security for Social Security drawers in America right now at about $18,000, you have a total annual income of about $68,000 a year, $68,500. What's remarkable is if you look at the Fred data, you can see that the median household income for someone in their 60s right now, about $68,700. So if you get to $1 million with the portfolio income coupled with Social Security, you actually are able to replace 100% of the median income to most 60-year-olds in this country right now.
And that's pretty exciting stuff. I think that's what you're asking for. So in my eyes, it shows me $1 million is still a big chunk of money, especially somebody who's approaching retirement, who lives a reasonable lifestyle. $1 million or reaching 7-figure status, still something to be celebrated. I do think it's important to notice if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s, 40s, and even 50s, we're going to have to go beyond that.
That's
We're
right.
going to have to save more, but I don't want to stop you from, even if you're a 20-something or a 30-something, when you reach that 7-figure graduation point, celebrate it. I mean, there's so many trolls out there that say, yes, inflation's eating it all away, but I can tell you there is a critical mass moment that occurs. I mean, it's not, I think it happens even before 7 figures.
Sure.
You will notice when you cross like a $500,000 of investment assets, when it goes up 10%, like a good investment year, it makes $50,000 of growth. When you cross 7 figures of $1 million, you make 10%. It goes up $100,000. You can quickly tell you're replacing years of your living expenses with that type of growth. That's the critical mass point that we get excited about. So don't let some troll tell you $1 million is not a lot. It just means that it just might be one of your stepping stones to 2 million, 3 million, and beyond. And we just want to give you the math, the numbers, because we're nerdy. And a lot of you guys, especially my 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds, you're like, hey, this is great. I love that y'all broke it down. But how do I know if I've stuck the landing on
or
this?
what about
Because
my situation?
this has a
not
lot
the
of
average?
variables, and I don't make what they were talking about on you need a budget or don't quit your day job
Yep.
or something like some of those different data points that we've used in our content creation. I want you, if you want personalized, that's why we always talk about the abundance cycle. We will give you tons of free advice. We'll love on you so you can start your wealth building journey. But you're going to be so successful. You're going to learn, apply, grow, reach success. And when you get to this point, we want you, when you start having the questions, what do I not know? I'm too busy to do this. I need to make sure I measure twice and cut once. You're going to remember who planted those seeds. And that's where the abundance cycle takes the relationship to the next level, and you work with one of our financial advisors.
And if you're not there yet, that's okay. Don't worry. We're going to continue to load you up. If you've not gone to check out our website, go to moneyguy.com/resources. We have tons of free deliverables out there. That's right, they're absolutely free for you to take and use. Things like our financial order of operations, or our wealth multiplier, or how do I know when to refinance, or what are the 10 commandments of wealth building. If those are things you're curious about, go to moneyguy.com/resources. Or if you need just a little bit more, maybe you're not ready to take it fully to the next level, but you wanted to know what to do with your next dollar, or what's a mechanism for beginning to build wealth and really track that well, go check out learn.moneyguy.com for some of our advanced material on how you can take your finances to the next level.
Guys, we have a blast creating this type of content where we not only give you advice, thoughts, and other things, but we give you the numbers behind everything that we're doing. I think that's quite unique. We love creating content for you. We love your feedback. We're going to keep doing it. I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen. Learn, apply, grow. Money Guy team out.